Shit We've Read is a proud member of Bilo Network, a network of geeky podcasts.
Please visit shitwe'veread.com to support the show.
Now let's talk about some books.
Hello, Internet Bookworms, and welcome to a very special episode of Shit We've Read, a sci-fi and fantasy book podcast hosted by some geeky friends. My name is Jason Rico, and I will be one of your hosts on today's episode, where we will be chatting with debut author Jenna Voris, who has a book coming out at the end of this month called Made of Stars. It is a YA science fiction, but before we can get to that interview, which we did with her, and it was a lot of fun, I need to introduce my co-hosts. First on the mic, we have Laura Benson. What's up, Laura?
Hey, glad to be here. Excited for this.
Glad you could join us for this. I know this is a book that you were excited to read as well.
Yes. Very, very, very excited.
Awesome. And then, of course, we also have Bella Romero. Hey, Bella.
Hey, guys. How are ya?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm excited to talk about the book.
Awesome. Yes. Before we kick it to the interview with Jenna, I do again want to remind everybody that the book is called Made of Stars. That is the book we'll be talking about, which is a young adult science fiction, which I feel is a little different. I feel like most YA books are fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
The YA science fiction is kind of a little different. The book itself is going to be available in a hardcover on March 28th from Viking Books for young readers, which is an imprint of Penguin and Random House. It'll also be available in ebook and audiobook formats. So however you want to consume your books, it is available for you. So I definitely recommend checking it out. All right. So before we get to the interview, Laura, do you want to read us the synopsis?
Sure, I would love to. Shane and Ava are a team. He steals the aircraft, she charms their mark, and together they take what they need. Not even their distracting chemistry could get in the way. Until Shane was caught and left to rot on a prison moon. Now, freshly escaped from confinement and simmering with anger, he has his sights set on his biggest job yet. Cyrus just graduated from the flight academy with a shiny new position lined up reporting to a well-respected general. On his very first assignment, he stops the outlaws in their tracks. Or he would have if the annoyingly handsome Lark hadn't fallen for Ava's deception. But when Shane uncovers a top-secret plot that would leave his homeworld at the mercy of Cyrus's military leaders, he makes it his mission to thwart them at all costs. It isn't long before Shane and Ava make interstellar headlines with each new heist. And thanks to a chance run-in with the rebels, Cyrus is caught between two versions of the truth. He must pick a side and fast, because Shane and Ava will bring the planet to its knees, or die trying.
Oh boy, don't you just hate when someone's annoyingly handsome?
So terrible.
What a burden.
I know. Okay, reminder that this episode that you're listening to now will be releasing before the book does. So we will not be getting into any of the meat and potatoes of the book. So this episode is going to be entirely spoiler-free, as we don't want to ruin that for anybody. Unless, of course, you're listening to this after the book has already released, in which case, go get it. But again, there's still no spoilers there. So I just want to make that perfectly clear.
It was very difficult to not bring up details when we were talking to Jenna, because there were so many things that I wanted to ask her about the different characters and parts of storyline. But it was still really fun talking to her about like her writing process and stuff with this book. So it'll be an enjoyable listen.
For sure. Yeah. It's I mean, the whole premise of the podcast is we talk about the shit we've read, and not being able to talk about it kind of is against everything we stand for. But
yeah.
But it was awesome talking to her, and I think everybody listening will really get a kick out of it. And lastly, we don't touch upon this at all in our discussion, again, because we don't talk about the book's plot at all, really. But I do want to mention that the book itself does have a few content warnings. So after listening to this interview, if you're thinking of checking out the book and you want to, educate yourself and prepare yourself, you can get a list of those content warnings on Jenna's website, which is Jenna, M as in Mary, Voris.com. So go over there, take care of yourself. Yeah, I think we have stalled long enough, and it is time finally to kick it over to our interview with author Jenna Voris.
Let's do it.
Where we talk a little bit about her inspiration for this book. She, talked us through her writing process. We talk about Taylor Swift, strangely enough, and then maybe get her to give us a little peek at her next book. So, without further ado, here you go. Enjoy. Hi, Jenna. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to talk to us about your new book, which I know we are all so excited to discuss.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Before we get into the book here on the podcast, we have a tradition of starting off our episodes by asking each other what are some of the other books, or as we lovingly refer to it, what is some of the other shit we've been reading, aside from our main book of discussion. So my first question to you is, what are some other books that you've recently read or are currently reading that may be noteworthy?
Gosh. I literally today just finished Ravel by Mia Smith, which is a YA fantasy. It's like Moulin Rouge inspired, which was super fun. I also just got yesterday and very excited to start reading Delicious Monsters by LaSalle Sandbury and Nightbirds by K.J. Armstrong.
Very cool.
Nice.
We read one of LaSalle's books for an episode, and we all really enjoyed it. So that's on my list to get to one day. Okay. Can you tell us, and anybody else who's listening who may not be familiar with your new book, or even you since you are a debut author, what to expect from the book? Can you give us the byline of what the book is about?
Yeah, I feel like every time someone is like do an elevator pitch, every word leaves my mind.
Sure, yeah.
It's a YA sci-fi Bonnie and Clyde retelling in space about two teenage outlaws and the pilot who is tasked with hunting them down.
Okay, so Bonnie and Clyde in space. What was it about the story of Bonnie and Clyde that inspired you to write your own reimagining, and then also why put it in space?
I was a theater kid in high school, and if you don't know, there is a Broadway adaptation of the Bonnie and Clyde story on Broadway as a musical. So that was how I was first introduced to the story. Because I was a big fan of Jeremy Jordan, who was one of the actors in the musical at the time. Still a big fan of Jeremy Jordan. I feel like I get to shout him out every time I do one of these interviews. But I was, again, a theater kid in high school, so I was familiar with that soundtrack. So when I sat down to write this book, it was when I was in the middle of querying my first very bad book that will never see the light of day. And I didn't really know much about publishing at the time, but I did know that people said that you should be working on something new while you were querying, just to kind of keep your mind off of things. But at the time, I didn't really know what else to write, because that first book was the only thing that I'd ever written. I had written it for like the last 3 years when I was in college, and I didn't think I had any other ideas. But I was listening to my Spotify playlist one night, and a song from the Bonnie and Clyde musical came on my shuffle, and I was like, actually, I feel like I could write like this. Like, it was a lot of interesting like emotions, and obviously big fan of Jeremy Jordan. And in my mind at the time, I was like, this is like a cheat code, because there's like already a story and like already characters, and like I won't even have to do any work. And obviously that's not true. Like, I did spend the next 2 years like completely rewriting the book. But that was where like the initial spark of inspiration came from. And the space element is honestly a combination of the fact that like I'm like not good at science is the thing, but space really, like, the concept is just so terrifying, and I feel like it elevates the stakes of whatever story you are telling, just because the atmosphere and like the vibes of the setting are also trying to kill you.
Oh, how interesting. My first assumption would have been that adding the space element would have come out of like the desire to add a coolness factor, but you looked at it as an opportunity to add in higher stakes. That's really cool. So you mentioned how you thought writing a Bonnie and Clyde retelling would be easier because the story is already in place, which actually leads nicely to my next question, which is what were some of the benefits, but also some of the constraints you found when adapting an already existing story?
I had a lot of fun with the retelling aspect just because I like research. And I got to like go into my like scholarly mode and check out a bunch of books from the library. And the first draft, or like the first few drafts that I wrote, it was a much stricter retelling in terms of events and what happened and who was doing what and what happened when. But when I signed with my agent and then my editor, they brought up a really important point about how there were basically two different stories happening within Made of Stars as I had it, which was like Ava and Shane and their group, and then Cyrus was completely separate the entire time. So we did a lot of work and revisions to be able to like really intertwine the three stories to make sure that every character was able to play off of each other and have each other as like an enemy, an ally, and it just made the book stronger overall. But that also was not something that I was thinking about in terms of like a strict retelling in the first few drafts, because that's obviously not historically accurate. And as the book went on and as we did draft after draft after draft, it just became clearer what story I was actually trying to tell and what elements I could pull from my research or what elements I could just completely make up because they fit the story. So yeah, it was honestly just a process of seeing what fit where we ended up.
It seems really common, when listening or reading about authors and how they set out to tell one story, but sometimes the characters or even the story itself dictates where the story actually needs to go, and you sometimes end up somewhere different than you originally set out to go. It's fascinating to think of stories as almost alive. Depending on how you look at the story of Bonnie and Clyde, though, and then by extension, Shane and Ava, they are criminals and therefore, quote unquote, bad guys. But I think society as a whole loves a good villain. So what do you think makes rooting for a bad guy so much fun to read about, but also to write?
I mean, speaking from like a strictly historical setting, what was really interesting about my research was that I found that even though like Bonnie and Clyde as people were like criminals and doing bad things, the public really viewed them as like these cool, like renegades who were standing up to the government. And like, they were almost like the celebrities at the time, mostly because the society was in like a terrible depression. It was during the Great Depression. So everyone was kind of like hungry and cold and starving. And they were like, oh, I guess this is also an option. Like they're sticking it to the man type of vibes. So that was like, again, really interesting to pull from like the historical research and also translate into like what that would feel like in space, what that would feel like in like a sci-fi setting. But I just honestly think characters like that are more interesting because I feel like it's just more realistic. Like most choices people make are not going to be 100% like good or kind. And especially like when you're a teenager, like you're like selfish and messy and you like make decisions that aren't necessarily great for everyone all the time. So I just always have more fun reading about those characters. I feel like it's more realistic. I feel like it's more interesting to not exactly know what's going to happen. So it was exciting to kind of do that with this as well.
That's awesome. I think like most people had a very basic understanding of Bonnie and Clyde in the story. I knew they're outlaws from the Great Depression, and that's about it. But I purposely didn't look up their story before reading your book because I didn't want to like hone in on the differences or similarities. I kind of just want to take your story as it was. But then afterwards, I went back and looked them up. I did my own research on them, and I agree with you that like the idea of them sticking it to the man and their origin story essentially was very interesting, and I definitely think it plays out very similarly in your book.
Yeah.
Other than obviously Bonnie and Clyde, what other books, authors, TV shows, movies would you say influenced Made of Stars, and then perhaps just your writing style in general?
Oh my gosh. For Made of Stars, it was definitely Leigh Bardugo and the Six of Crows duology for sure.
Okay.
That was a really big influence of like the crime, found family, and like one terrible boy who does not like to talk about his feelings. Also the Illuminae trilogy, that was something that I read back in high school or early college. That was like my first like big introduction into sci-fi books. And I really loved how interesting like the format was in those books. And like the people versus like the machine, people versus the government type of vibes that you get from that trilogy. Definitely Star Wars Rogue One for sure. That like movie rewrote my brain chemistry when I was in the theaters. Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, definitely those for sure.
I'm so glad you said Rogue One because I was picking up heavy Rogue One vibes in the best possible way.
I see it.
And as I was reading, I was actively trying to figure out any other books that had similar vibes. And although I didn't think of Six of Crows, now that you mentioned it, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely see those similarities. Okay, well, thank you for answering my questions so far. I'm going to stop hogging the mic and pass it over to Laura for the next part of the interview.
Yeah.
Laura, take it away.
So it's always really cool to learn like the process that goes into publishing, writing, and then publishing the book. So I want to first ask, from the moment you first had the inspiration to tell this story, how long did it take you to write it and complete it?
With this book, it's interesting because like I said, I had spent so long on the first book that I'd ever tried to write. I had spent years and years on it. And with Made of Stars, this was the first book that I had ever tried to outline, mostly because I did have kind of a historical framework that I was able to work off of. So it felt like I could easily divide the book into like, here's where it's starting and like, here's where it's going. And like, here's the midpoint and everything like that. So this is the first book I wrote with an outline. And so I finished the first draft in 3 months, which was like the quickest that I had ever written.
Wow.
Anything. I know, it was wild. Again, I spent several years rewriting it. But yeah, I finished it, the first draft, in 3 months, and it was the fastest that I'd ever written anything at the time.
Wow, that's a good amount to get done in that little amount of time. That's so cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the process was like? How did you go from the outline and translate it into more of the actual fleshed out story?
Yeah. Once I started outlining, I am someone who needs to know like how it ends so that I know like what I'm building toward. So I always knew like what the last chapter of the book was going to be. The middle section is what has changed the most during my several rounds of revisions. But after I had that completed first draft, I actually ended up entering a mentorship contest called Author Mentor Match that pairs published or agented authors with aspiring writers. Because at the time I wasn't really having any luck querying it. Nobody really wanted to see more. So I was like, okay, maybe something is wrong with the pages. We'll see what's going on. And we essentially rewrote the entire middle of the book, just kind of bringing out the political elements of it and making the character arcs stronger and make sense in what they were supposed to be doing with the story. My mentor just essentially taught me so much more about editing and revising and outlining based on character motivations and character wants rather than plot. So I had never really thought of story in terms of character beats before. I had always just been like, when you look it up online, it's like 3-act structure, 4-act structure, here are the plot beats. And that's what I had tried to write off of. But I am a very character focused writer in general. Like dialogue comes really easily to me. I usually like know who the characters are pretty quickly. So when they introduced this like new method of like characters leading the plot, that just kind of revolutionized how I looked at storytelling in general. And that's also something that I've just like taken in and used for every other book that I've written since.
Was there, or do you have like a most or least favorite step of the publishing process?
Ooh. I mean, I really do hate drafting just because I hate looking at a blank page and knowing that like no one else is going to fill it except for me. Like, like after that, I can kind of be like, oh, I'm like waiting on notes from my editor, or like, oh, I'm waiting on like marketing to do a cover reveal or something. And it's not like entirely on me, but the first draft stage, especially when you know like what your story could be and you have this like clear vision of it in your mind, and then you write, and because obviously it's a first draft, it looks nothing like a finished book. It looks nothing like the beautiful image you have in your head. Mm-hmm. That is like, it's always discouraging. And it's always something that I just have to remind myself that every time I sit down to write a book, I'm just going to feel like I've never written a book in my life. And it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult. And then I'm going to get over it and it'll be fine.
I could see that. It seems a little intimidating, being that is all on you, and everybody else is waiting for you. Um, you had previously mentioned that you wrote the majority of the first draft in a library. First of all, that's really cool. I love that. But aside from having a consistent writing space, do you have any other ritualistic requirements when you're writing? Like, is there a specific type of music or time of day, that kind of thing?
I'm definitely a night person. So my 10 p.m. to like 2 a.m. is really good for me and really terrible for my sleep schedule.
Classic Rico. Yeah. The vampire. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think part of the reason why Made of Stars, I was able to write it so quickly was because it was the summer before I went back to grad school. So I was only working part-time. So I did have more time to actually sit down and write it out. Now that I'm working like a 9-to-5 job that I've been at for a few years, it's just a little different. It's kind of like when I'm on deadline, I usually just try to write in the evenings whenever I can. Sometimes I'll write on weekends. Sometimes I don't want to do anything on the weekends. So it really depends on what I'm feeling. I do need complete silence, which is annoying. So I have like my noise canceling headphones, but music is also like a really important part of my process. I have like really extensive playlists for every character and also for the book that I will listen to. And like, if I'm driving to a cafe, I will listen to it like on the drive over, just usually like the same song on repeat over and over. Or just like the 10 minutes before I actually like sit down to start writing, I'll just like listen to it on repeat. And then when I sit down, just like obviously turn it all off and just live with the thoughts in my own head.
Kind of like gets you into the right mindset to write that character.
Exactly.
That makes sense. That's cool.
I have a quick question out of curiosity. So which character's playlist has Getaway Car on it?
Oh my gosh, that's actually not on any specific character playlist. I'm looking at it right now. It's on my general, like overall playlist. But thank you for knowing that Getaway Car is on my playlist.
I mean, it's like the minute I was like Bonnie and Clyde, like put the money in the bag and I stole the keys. That was the last time you ever saw me. Like, come on.
Exactly. I know the titles of like the different parts, like part 1 and part 2 are definitely Getaway Car lyrics. And I'm just really glad that they let me keep those in.
It's an essential part of the writing process. So
it is.
To have a Taylor Swift reference.
That's true. I did finish the first draft of this book the day that Taylor Swift dropped Lover, which is interesting because like it's not like a Lover book, but every time that I like listen to that album, I'm like, yes, Made of Stars.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome timing.
Every like moment of my life is defined by a Taylor Swift album. So
yeah,
I can definitely relate to that.
I get it.
Yours is a little bit cooler, but you know. That's awesome.
Well, I have just one last question. How, if at all, did the experience of getting Made of Stars published, how did it change your writing process for like your next book or your next piece of work?
Oh my gosh. Interestingly enough, my second YA that's coming out in 2024, I actually wrote that one before I even had an agent. So I didn't have to go through the like dreaded second book syndrome of like writing a new book under deadline. And every time that I tell someone that who has gone through that, they're like, you are so lucky. Like, please live in that. So I had recently turned in a round of revisions for that book. And even though I was on deadline, it was definitely not as extensive as I thought it would be. But moving forward into the hopefully next YA that I'm able to sell, and also other projects that I am writing, since I think that there is a bigger sense of writing for people who are not just me. When I sat down to write Made of Stars, I think it was both like a blessing and a curse that I was like, no one's ever going to see this. It's totally fine. So like I could put all of the tropes and things that I loved about books, I could just put them in mine and not really care. And I could put little Taylor Swift references in, not really thinking anyone would ever read it. And I mean, it worked out. Hopefully, obviously there's been a lot of revisions, but like that one worked out. But now I am just like more conscious of the fact that it's for me. Yes, obviously I want to enjoy what I am writing, but I also want it to be something that other people can enjoy and other people relate to. And obviously there are now other people who are reading my book widely for the first time, which is just an added extra layer of pressure. So writing anything new is this like combination of trying to be like practical about career decisions and like what you want to write next, and just like trying to make good choices there. And then also remembering that you're also supposed to have fun with this at the end of the day, and that you also have to read your book and that you should enjoy it.
It's very true. Definitely need to make sure you are spending your time writing something that you like. So, well, I'm gonna kick this off over to Bella for a few of their questions for you.
Yeah. So kind of circling back on the Taylor Swift question, just because I think Rico put this in here and I hadn't even thought of it. But, you know, our favorite characters, I know that this book is like your baby, and you obviously, you know, never have a favorite child, but if you had to pick one, is there a favorite? And then I'll get into the Taylor Swift part next, I think. But
oh my gosh. I really love Cornelia. She's also Sagittarius, and I'm a Sagittarius, and I just feel like a real bond.
I'm a Sagittarius.
Oh my gosh. Wait, when's your birthday?
November 26th.
Oh, mine's November 30th. Wow.
What?
I love this. Anyway. Yeah.
That's why we love Taylor Swift, a fellow Sag.
You're so right. Yeah, I've always loved Cornelia. Obviously, I know I'm not supposed to pick like a favorite POV character, but Ava has always been like the heart of the story for me, and always the one that I was like, that's I think like the POV that I would want people to love the most.
I also loved Ava and Cornelia because she felt like a kick-ass female Luke Skywalker, which is like always my favorite in the Star Wars universe. So, I mean, does Cornelia have any reference to Cornelia Street? You said you finished it though before Lover came out. So
I did finish it before Lover came out, which means that I wrote like the last several chapters and then like laid on my bed to be like, okay, now I get to listen to a Taylor Swift album, and then was personally victimized by the song Cornelia Street. I was like, I am like emotionally fragile right now. I don't know what you expected me to do.
Excellent.
So I like that it's unintentional.
I like that that's unintentional too. Again, that feels like it was made to be made in the stars, right? Like, right. I see the connection now. I love that. You really manifested Cornelia Street, so thank you for that. But I don't think this is too much of a spoiler for folks who, you know, care about books and diversity of books. But, you know, from pretty early on in the book, you tease a variety of different relationships, romances included, platonic friendships. But how different was it writing those relationships, like kind of switching from like platonic to romantic? And I just want to say, like, I appreciate that wasn't just a love story. Like there were like a lot of development in these friendships. And I think that that's something, you know, I mean, I read a lot of romance books, and maybe it's just my warped point of view, but you don't get a lot of friendship books. So I don't know. I appreciated that this had a good balance of both. So
thanks. I mean, I think some of the most important and influential relationships in my life are friendships. And I think that there's like a really interesting, almost kind of like magic that can be found in just like those everyday relationships that aren't necessarily romantic. And I also have like some of my very best friends are like men too. And I also love the fact that like you can have platonic friendships between like men and women, and it never has to be romantic, and you are able to like support each other in that same way no matter what. So that was important for me to include, just because I feel like it's so it's such a part of like who I am and such a big part of like my experience that like these friendships are so important to me. And then also I just think that that's kind of how it is growing up like as a teenager too. You're also like a little bit in love with everyone and like have a crush on everyone, but also like, you know who your people are, and like that's just like what's going to get you through.
I love that. I like it. It felt very authentic. And I think that really shone through in the writing. And I can tell it was a big part for you. So I think our readers or our listeners, will like that. And readers will like that. So, you know, when you're not reading, what are you doing? Or sorry, when you're not writing or reading, what do you do? What is that sort of like rounds out the whole picture of you here?
Yeah. I've recently tried to pick up some hobbies that are not like competitive hobbies. So I've started knitting and crocheting this year, which is very exciting. I'm making a sweater. Except that like when I started learning how to knit, I like turned to my friend and I was like, okay, so like, how do you know that you're the best at knitting? Like, how do I win knitting? And she was like, no, that's not the point.
That's not the point. Yeah.
There's knitting racing, right? Is that a thing?
Right. I was like, we're trying to steer away from that. It's okay. I am on a kickball team, which is I live in DC, which is very Washington, DC, is being on an intramural kickball league.
I'm so jealous.
I know, right?
That sounds fun.
It's really fun. You get to like play under the Washington Monument and feel like you're in an episode of The West Wing. It's great. But yeah, I like that. I like hiking.
Wow.
Anything that gets me outside and not like thinking about publishing is great.
Makes sense.
I respect that. I work in politics, so I also have done an intramural kickball league here in Sacramento under the Capitol, basically. I mean, down the street, but and also am a reformed competitive person. So I also do crochet and knitting and try not to
Bella,
make it
you're competitive?
No.
Okay, but like, who amongst the two of you is the most competitive? Go.
We're gonna fight about it. I think.
We go. Stop it. We're trying to get away from that, Rico. Get out of here.
I'm just jealous that I haven't been a kickball team because I really want to do kickball. Here in Sacramento, we have an adult social league, and that's one of the events or sports that they do. But I haven't had any friends who want to do it with me, and I don't want to like join a random team and make new friends. Ugh.
Gross.
Gross.
Yeah, I did it with friends, and that like people I kind of knew, and that still like wasn't great because I was like, yeah, they're not my friends. Like, I know them, but it's not nearly as fun.
Wow.
So I can understand that, Rico. So is there anything else you want our listeners to know? Anyone who's going to read the book to know a little bit more about you or the story, what we can find, anything that you feel like we've missed, and our questions that you feel like is critical?
I don't think so. I mean, it comes out March 28th, available for pre-order now, and I really hope you like it.
I'm pretty sure people will enjoy it quite a bit. I definitely loved it. I tried spacing it out so I can like really focus in on it more, so I can talk about it a little bit more. Otherwise, I probably would have just like devoured it all in one night.
No,
it was really hard to like set it down after my 70-page mark every day. It's like, all right, stop. But
see, I did the opposite. So first of all, when I saw this book was coming out, I was really excited. I was like, this sounds like a really fun book. I'm excited to read this. And then I don't stay up late very often to just fully read as much as I can. And then it was suddenly like 2-3 o'clock and I was like almost done. I was like, oh my gosh, I read that so fast.
Wow, I'm sorry for wrecking your sleep schedule.
Oh no, it worked great. I loved this book. It was a lot of fun reading.
Those are the best books when you stay up all night reading it. Like that's how you know you're really connected. So it's a all-nighters club book for sure.
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you, Jenna, on email, because you had reached out to us, and then the publisher also reached out separately. And the publisher gave us a couple books just to kind of get on our radar, and one of them was this one. And so we had talked about it, like, this is the one we want to read. Like, this is the one that gets us excited.
Thank you.
And then when you reached out, I was like, well, that's even more serendipitous, because, like, that's the one we wanted to read anyway. So it's been great chatting with you. Thank you for writing this book. Congratulations on being an author now. It's out in the world pretty soon. That's super exciting.
It feels like it's like so close. I feel like I've been talking about this book for so long, and now it's like about to come out that I don't know what I'm going to do, and I have to start talking about it like in present tense, or I'm like, this is my book that is out. Like, I don't know.
Yep.
We'll see.
Really quick, I have one question. Earlier, you mentioned some of your favorite tropes, or you brought up favorite tropes, and I wanted to know what are some of your favorite tropes?
Ooh, like in Made of Stars, or just like in general?
In general, just
in general. Yeah. I'm curious too.
I love like a classic, like forced proximity or only one bed. That always hits. One that I feel like only works in fiction. I've been reading a lot of rom-coms and like romance lately. I feel like second chance romance only works in fiction because I feel like in books it's so like angsty and fun. But like in real life, if like I ever tried to go back to like an ex, I would have 7 friends who would be like, "Stop it! Put down your phone! Don't text him!" And it would be like a whole. But like in books, it's great. I've come around to like a friends to lovers, which is super fun. Yeah, I think those are my top. Oh, I love a grumpy sunshine. Yeah, those are probably my top. Mm-hmm.
I agree with all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, those are good.
I'm still on the discovery of what my favorite tropes are. I
thought it was tentacles, Rico.
Ooh,
listen. That's the whole other episode.
That's not what we're talking about today.
It's a long running joke, Jenna. I'm so sorry.
Anyhow, moving on.
It just every episode we got to bring it up.
All right. Lastly, can you give us any teases as to what your next project will be?
Yes. It's very different, which I think is super fun. My next YA is actually a YA contemporary, so it's not in space at all. And it's coming out next spring, and it's about it's like a sapphic road trip book about a girl whose favorite singer dies and leaves behind this time capsule that's only to be opened at her funeral. But when they open it, it is empty. So this girl goes on a cross-country quest to find the missing time capsule. And it's also dual POV with the singer's journey as well.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I'll be reading that one too.
Yeah.
I was like
stuck inside in 2020 and like watching National Treasure too many times.
Not possible.
You're right. That's right.
Yeah, I was like,
about?
that does not sound like a waste of time. What are you talking about?
No. Have you watched the TV show by any chance?
I did watch the TV show. I enjoyed it.
I haven't watched it yet. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll check it out then.
Well, Riley Poole was like a really big influence on me as a child. I don't know if you could tell from reading Made of Stars, where there's like a quirky little computer guy. But Riley Poole is like kind of like the blueprint for men, in my opinion. And he guest stars in an episode on the show. So that's something to look forward to.
Awesome.
Cool.
Laura, Bella, were there any other questions you wanted to ask?
No, I'm excited for other folks to listen to listen to this episode and hopefully read the book because it's a great one. So always support a fellow Swiftie too. So
yeah, no, this was a really great book. I'm so glad that you were able to jump on here and chat with us.
Yeah.
I'm a little disappointed that Cornelia wasn't after Cornelia Street, only because like me not being a Swiftie whatsoever, when I made that connection, I felt like that meme of like, what's his name? Charlie Day with all the like the board behind him. I was like, I'm making connections here, people. And so I put that in for Bella and it wasn't even a real connection. So.
It was completely
Rico, you were clowning yourself. Yeah.
Oh well.
He's on TikTok, like Swift Talk, like, okay, she wore purple today, which means Speak Now is coming. And she like accidentally showed like her middle finger, which means it could be the second or the third day of the month.
What else am I going to do at 2 a.m. in the morning, you know?
No. That's completely reasonable.
Listen to Midnights.
Maybe Jenna was having like, you know, a mental connection with Taylor Swift, and that's maybe it is from her. I don't know.
I agree. She sent me a message.
Yeah, in my mind.
I thought you were about to be like, she did actually message me, and I was like, shut up.
No,
I was about to get so excited, but still, in mental message, delusional or real, I support it. It's exciting nonetheless.
All right. Well, again, I know we've mentioned it a few times already, but it's worth mentioning again that Made of Stars is out March 28th, which, if you're listening to this episode right when it releases, is only 2 weeks away. So first and foremost, thank you for listening. But more importantly, that means that there is still time to pre-order. Either way, I definitely recommend you get this. I know I speak for everyone here when I say that it's a fantastic debut novel, and I genuinely cannot wait to see what you read in the future. I am already sold on the description for your next book. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you again so much for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to tell people where they can find you and follow you and keep up with all your stuff?
Yeah, basically on any social media platform, I'm just at Jenna Voris with my full name. And then my website is Jenna M, as in Mary, Voris.com.
Nice.
Cool.
Thank you again, Jenna, for joining us. Super excited to have you on here. And yes, for Laura and Bella, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Shit We've Read is hosted by Laura Benson, Jason Rico, and Bella Romero, with music by Joshua Chilton and editing by Jason Rico.
To join the discussion on this and all other books we've read, find us at Shit We've Read on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok.
For more information about us or to request transcripts, please visit shitwe'veread.com.
This podcast is part of the Bilo Network. Visit bilonetwork.com for more great geeky podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening.